Welcome to the 19th ESC Every Soldier Counts podcast.
Wherever you find American troops today, you find the men of the Transportation Corps. Enough and on time. That's the story we tell you today. The story of the Army Quartermaster Corps.
These youthful servicemen are members of the Army's Military Police Corps.
One of the most important forces behind the lines, the Army Ordnance Corps.
Welcome to the 19th ESC Every Soldier Counts podcast. I am Sergeant First Class Adam Ross, Public Affairs NCOIC for 19th Expeditionary Sustainment Command. And on this episode of the podcast, we are talking to Major Fred Dequina with G4 here at 19th ESC. We're going to talk about some interesting assignments he's had, as well as some of his fitness exploits over the years. Maybe this episode's coming out in the new year, so maybe some inspiration for some of our listeners. And I'm joined by my special co-host in this episode, Captain Mike Houston, PAO for 19th ESC.
Greetings and salutations, team.
Okay, so sir, so Major Dequina, you are the G4 for 19th ESC, and for our less military listeners, how would you describe that position?
Just basically overseeing supply and logistics for the entire ESC command.
And since 19th ESC, we basically are supply and logistics overall. So but it's still similar to that position.
Absolutely. Yeah, our main focus is mainly for internal logistics, vice our DMC or distribution management section that basically oversees external logistics support for the entire pen.
Okay, awesome. And so we when we have guests, we like to start off with kind of their origin story. So what brought you into the Army, sir?
Oh yeah, I didn't know what to do with my life, and let me just say, it's like I grew up in California, and it wasn't the nice part of California. It wasn't the tourist part, even though it was San Diego. I came from a sailor. Actually, my dad was in the Navy. My mom was a nurse. And bottom line is they didn't want me to directly enlist into the military. They basically forced me to go to college. And to be honest with you, I did not know what I wanted to do in college. And probably like many of your listeners, they don't know exactly what they're doing in college either, right? So anyways, a buddy of mine presented the opportunity to join ROTC. I was like, look, if this whole major thing doesn't work out for me and I can't find a good job, I'll have the military to fall back on. And so I did that for a couple years, and then obviously I commissioned, and here I am about 17 years later.
Okay, and what college were you going to?
San Diego State University.
Oh, the Aztecs.
That's right, mighty Aztec Battalion, absolutely.
Okay, and so you did ROTC, and then so you've always been a supply logistics officer?
I've always been a supply logistics officer, absolutely.
Okay, and what surprised you about that career path when you got that branch? What were your thoughts? Were you thinking about doing something else, or?
Yeah, actually was. I was hoping I was going to get branch detailed armored, something cool, something testosterone driven. At least for my first couple years as a lieutenant in the military. Obviously, that didn't pan out, so I was a little disappointed to just be strictly logistics my entire career. But to be honest with you, I think it's gonna play out in my benefit in the end.
Yeah, it seems like it's taken you some interesting places. And
yeah.
Speaking of that, so a lot of our guests, they come to Korea from like Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, Fort Campbell. So why don't you tell us where you PCS you're from?
Oh yeah, so PCS here from Ottawa, Canada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Ottawa, Canada was part of the combined joint or Canadian Joint Operational Command, CJOC, Ottawa. So the best way to kind of describe that headquarters, it's almost like their Pentagon equivalent, but it's all in just one tiny building, no bigger than our headquarter building.
Oh, really?
That kind of runs the majority of the Canadian forces, special forces, and their conventional forces.
And Ottawa being the capital of Canada.
Correct.
So it's right in there with the political infrastructure,
oh, yeah.
too. Okay.
Yes.
And so how do you get a job like that then? Is it just... Is that like MOS immaterial, or is it a slot for logistics?
Yeah, there's multiple slots in there, and if anyone's interested, just reach out to Army North. It's specifically their MPEP program. MPEP is their what do you call it? Military Exchange Program Managers, and every once in a while, some of those opportunities will come up. So if you look through the marketplace, you just have to look carefully for that MPEP. But how I actually got into that position, I wasn't really supposed to be there. All it was probably, well, let me just say this. I did have a friend over at HRC. I was supposed to go to another assignment, and he just asked me on a whim at the last minute before the RFO was cut if I could move to Ottawa, Canada for this assignment. And how that came about is, bottom line, he knew that I was single, basically had no responsibilities, no family, no dogs, no pets. And he knew out of the entire menu of officers, no one else fit that mold. So he just literally called me on the phone and said, hey, do you mind going there? I said no. And
can you drop everything and move to Canada?
Pretty much. Like I said, at the last minute.
Issue soldier.
Yeah. And again, I was prepared to PCS to this other location. I think it was actually Leavenworth for TRADOC.
Oh.
To redo some soft doctrine for logistics, and like I said, last minute changed.
And so, what's that like in processing then into a foreign military? Like, is there an American office within there?
No, not really. So what happens is you in process into Army North, and that's over at, or headquartered in San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
You do that maybe 2 or 3 weeks before you actually in process into Canada. And in processing in Canada, it's literally just showing your ID, your visitor pass, and then they give you an ID, and you're kind of free to roam, not only the headquarters, but the entire country.
Okay. So it was, had you traveled in Canada before that at all?
Yeah. So coincidentally, I do already have family there, but they're on the western side of Canada, Vancouver Island, if anyone's familiar geographically of Canada. But otherwise, other than that point when I was assigned in Ottawa, I've never been to the eastern side or to the central part of Canada. It's always been on the western.
So what's that like, getting to be within a foreign military, see how their processes are and their decision making?
Yeah, it's let me just say it's interesting.
Peek behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, get good and bad. There's definitely a lot of good and bads. And one thing that I can say that benefited with my presence over there is for them to better understand the logistics aspect. So even though they work closely with us in a lot of operations, what they do know is that when they request things from American forces, it somehow magically appears. But what I provided them is a little insight on how it magically appears. So it definitely aids in their planning process, especially for operations globally, not just within the continent.
Yeah, so I was able to work with Canadians a little bit in Afghanistan when I was there. The one thing I remember from them is their benefits were like lavish compared to ours. Where at that time, the deployed Canadian soldiers, they got 2 R&Rs, and their dependents got like a special gratuity during their R&R, so that they could go on like a good vacation together with their.
And it's funny you bring that up, because I experienced a little bit of their lavishness, so to speak. So I was in a conference in, I think it was Scott Air Force Base, for 1 week. And typically when we go to TDY to locations like that, it's like the cheapest hotel, per diem rates are relatively small. So that's what I was expecting. And then when I returned, I turned in all my receipts. I was surprised to receive a hefty sum back. And I had to ask their finance clerk, like, is this correct? They're like, yes, sir, that's the standard rate. I'm like, Jesus. Like, if we had sent like 10 people, do you guys completely fund this? And they're like, absolutely. But it was a hefty sum back. So,
yeah, it's surprising when you there's those little partnerships. There's more of those U.S. Canadian partnerships out there than people think. When I was with 42nd MP Brigade, we had a partnership with the Vancouver BC Police, and we would go up there. They would come down to Washington, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, and so you said this before. This is your first time in Korea. So what were your thoughts about Korea before you came over here when you got the word?
Well, let me just say absolutely no thoughts. And so when I received this assignment, I was asking a lot of my buddies that were in Korea when they were lieutenants and captains, and all I received back is like, "Oh, Fred, you're gonna have a blast," like what part of Korea are you gonna be in? And I told them I wasn't sure, but they're like, regardless of where you're gonna be, it's gonna be an outstanding experience. And thus far, it's kind of lived up to that. What I will say is it's a lot busier than I expected. A whole lot busier.
Yeah, and it's what I tell people too, and what I think a common refrain is that here you really, for any MOS, you really do your job too.
Yes.
It's not just training to do your job; you're really doing it.
Absolutely, and it's extremely fast paced. I was not really expecting a fast paced op tempo.
But within that, you've still found time for your fitness hobbies.
Yeah.
And so could you tell us a little bit about that? Did that start before you were in ROTC, or have you always kind of been in?
Yeah, well, kind of. So I was a fat kid growing up, and of course, when men people hear that from me, they can't believe it. But I definitely was, and the turning point was the latter half of high school when I was getting ready to go to college, and I was walking up the flight of stairs in my mom's house, and it was only 14 steps. And I was out of breath at the very top. And I looked down at the bottom of the stairs, and I'm like, man, at the time, I think I was about 14, 15 years old. I'm like, there's absolutely no reason that a 15-year-old is out of breath at the top of the stairs. And basically from that moment on, I just kept on walking up and down those stairs. And then slowly I ventured outside. And it was odd for me to venture outside because before then, I would only play basketball, every once in a while. But it wasn't enough to burn all the calories that I consumed. So if anyone in there with an Asian background, you grew up basically eating rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if you weren't active, you're not burning that. So you're just gaining weight. And that's pretty much how I was. And so, as I started becoming more active, what I found out was as my body started to change, I started losing weight. My head was extremely big. So to balance that out, I started lifting weights. And then, of course, there was a compromise. Like, as I was building all this upper body strength, I was starting to slow down. So then now I've kind of found this happy medium.
And I'm sure in San Diego, too, no shortage of things to do outside.
No, not at all.
That helped you discover, what was out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I started discovering more of these things as it became more fit and more competitive. So running in races, rock climbing, swimming, all that kind of stuff.
And so for you, I know you're really into cycling. That's one of your things. So take us through one of your typical long bike rides here in Daegu.
Yeah, well, so I think it's a misconception. I'm more of a runner than a cyclist.
Okay.
I just literally picked up, I wouldn't say picked up, seriously cycling when I arrived here, mainly because Colonel De La Cruz and one of my coworkers, CW2 Welch, he's a food service advisor. And, number one, Colonel De La Cruz is pretty big into cycling. I think he first started seriously cycling around 2015. And the dude, when you look at him, you wouldn't think of it. But if you ever cycle with this guy, he's a maniac. I mean, on the flats or straights, I doubt anyone can keep up with the dude. But anyways, that's part of my competitive nature. That's kind of what fed my interest more into cycling. Is not only did I want to, I wouldn't say beat Colonel De La Cruz, but I want to at least keep in pace with him. And then I wanted to see how far I can push myself. And it's always been like that with any kind of new adventure in physical fitness for me. So it started with running, and now it's kind of slowly transitioning to cycling.
So what was what kind of running? Are you talking marathons, or what kind of running, competitive running are you doing?
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't say it's competitive. My only competition's myself. Right. But it did start with marathon running. The distance running to me was always the challenge that I wanted to overcome. And then once I did my first marathon, I asked myself, well, can I do this a little bit faster? So I always trained for that. And then I finally realized, training for marathons, it takes too much time, way too much time. And so I literally just cut it all the way down to half marathons, and that was my event. So any event that led up to a half marathon, for example, 5Ks, 10Ks, I would adjust my training for that, but it's all in preparation for that half marathon. And so my fastest half marathon to date was about, I think it was a 1 hour 21 on a very hilly course in Annapolis, Maryland.
Oh, really?
I think I placed 4th overall in that entire race out of 5,000 people. But that was kind of at my peak. And, of course, through time and injury, I'm not quite there, so I'm trying to get back up to that level.
And did that go through the Naval Academy in Annapolis, or was it on city streets?
Well, yeah, it was on city streets. It actually started, I think, just outside the Naval Academy. Yeah.
Yeah, I've run through there a couple times. There's a little pedestrian gate you can get through. It's nice. So I've run. I think I share your opinion with half marathons and marathons, because a full marathon, sounds good in your head. You like to say 20. I ran 26.2, but after mile 18. It's just, you're gritting your teeth.
Yeah,
and
you're second guessing your life choices. Absolutely.
You got to remember, the first person to run a marathon died.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. My first half marathon was in Afghanistan, actually, Kandahar Airfield. And what I remember from that is extremely cold morning, probably as cold as it gets in that part of Afghanistan. And when we were running past the flight line, a fighter jet flew over the top of me. And I was like, oh, this is, not many people get to experience this kind of thing.
Exactly.
And so it does take a long time to train for a marathon, but what goes into your training for a half marathon?
Yeah, interestingly, it's literally just a lot of miles. And what a lot of people, when they first get into running, they immediately, especially for us, like when it used to be the old PT test where you had your push-ups, sit-ups, and the 2-mile run, their focus was just speed. Like, how do I get faster? And really, the only way to get faster is conditioning your body. And what a lot of people don't realize is it's just consistency with just putting in miles. And I can go into the scientifics about it, but there's multiple YouTube channels, a lot of books that people can read if they want to explore what those possibilities or different strategies to get faster and stronger are. But really what it comes down to is consistency. So the more you're out there running, regardless if it's hot outside or cold outside, your body will continually improve. It's the second that you stop and take that 2-3 month long break because you're just not motivated or you have an injury, that's when it becomes very difficult to kind of get back into the swing of things.
And I'd also say with full marathons, it's a greater injury risk. And so when you're training for a half marathon, a lot less injury risk with those long.
Well, I fully agree. And part of that, too, and I was talking to Mike about this, was the form aspect. I think a lot of people neglect form when they're running, and all they're focused on is trying to move that foot in front of the other one as fast as they can. And what they don't realize is there are certain elements to that to not only run more efficiently, but to prevent injury. And anytime I've spoken with other people to try to coach them in running better, the first thing I focus on is form, because once you get the form down, believe it or not, all those cases for injury, hamstring pulls, groin pulls, all that stuff, I wouldn't say magically goes away, but the susceptibility of that individual occurring those injuries is greatly diminished.
Yeah, and so the FM 7-22, the new, it seems like in my time in the Army they've really evolved the fitness guidance to cut down on injuries, like the days of running with weighted vests, for 5 miles kind of over. But so Captain Houston and I took an ACFT today, and recently there was some discussion with senior leaders about the failure rate with ACFT is mostly on the 2-mile run.
Yep.
So what's your theory on that?
Yeah. So the 2-mile run it's just not enough running for people. And is it something that many people can overcome? Absolutely. The problem, though, is a lot of people don't have motivation to run because they either have bad or traumatic experiences with running, or they feel like they're never going to be fast enough. And I will say this: I'm pretty confident if you leave some of those soldiers with me for at least a month, I'm probably not going to motivate them to think that running is fun, but I will motivate them to think that running can be a lot more efficient, a lot more beneficial for them than it was before they started training with me. And it's not to say that I'm a certified trainer or anything like that, but what I will say is I have trained multiple people to not only be better runners, and that's mainly because no one ever taught them formally how to run. And once you just teach them those fundamental basics of how your foot should be landing, proper posture when you're running, just those simple basics, it just changes the whole dynamics of running.
I think with some people too, they waste a lot of energy with how they're running too. Yeah.
Yep. And don't get me wrong, of course, with the running portion for the ACFT, it's towards the latter half of the test. So of course, prior to that, you're doing the
sprint, drag, carry, leg tuck.
Yep. You're doing the leg tuck. Isn't there like a squat aspect or
deadlift?
Yeah, the deadlifts, and all of that stuff drains a lot of the energy out of your legs. But if people do a little bit of research on like triathlon athletes, and you're transitioning from the swim, from the bike, and then to the run, what little do they know is that there's certain aspects of your muscles that even though it's the same muscle that's being used, it's certain portions of the muscles that you can activate to still be more efficient in running at the end of all those events.
And so has the ACFT changed how your fitness regimen, what you focus on?
Well, yeah, a little bit. So then, of course, my old training plan used to revolve around push-ups, sit-ups, and a run. But what I like to tell people is, well, now, I guess you can say it's slightly changed. Now that I kind of focus more on total body workouts instead of just focusing on those specific events. And what I realized, too, is that by focusing on total body workouts, it's reduced my susceptibility to injury. And, of course, I'm doing a lot more reading on this and just listening to a bunch of YouTube podcasts about it. But what I try to remind people is that your body is a system. So then when you focus on just one aspect, so, for example, your abs, little people will know that you have to also train your lower back. So doing like lower back extensions, things like that. Because anytime you start having lower back problems, it originates through weakness because of undertrained muscles. The same thing goes for your legs.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, they had never really trained for deadlift before, or even really try to do the best form they can for a deadlift. And so you're in Korea here, sir. What's next for you? What other goals do you have in your career?
But whatever comes up. To be honest with you, I've treated my career that same way. Whatever opportunity presents itself. What I like to do. I was an instructor for about 2 or 3 years at Fort Lee, around 2013 to 2015. And what I reminded all of my students, regardless of what assignment you have, and even if you think it sucks, just grow where you're planted. And I follow the same philosophy as well.
And have anything for him?
So you hit the nail right on the head. From my perspective, talking about the form piece, my background, I'm more of a weightlifter, powerlifted for 12 years of my life competitively, and form will make or break you. There is no scientific reason why me at the time at 150 pounds could squat more than a 270-pound, lifter. It's form and conditioning. Kind of like you said, as long as if you stick with it and you don't take those absurd breaks, the repetitions, it builds and it builds upon itself. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one, sir.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And what I find interesting too, just through the time that I spent in the military and just observing, the mentality of soldiers, is a lot of the soldiers now that I think go to the gym, it's mainly for, I don't know, I guess the vanity aspect of it, just looking good. And what I have to remind people is, you don't go to the gym just to look good. Go to the gym and your number one priority should be feeling better. If health is not your number one priority, then it should be. And then after that, just wait for people to give you the compliments, because the amount of low self-esteem that I see or observe with a lot of soldiers nowadays is because of that. They look in the mirror and they're like, oh, I don't look as good as I should be. Then they go to the gym for 2 weeks. They do a plan and they don't see the results, and they're like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Again, stay consistent. Don't jump on the scale. Don't be discouraged by the weight that you see, and don't look at the mirror so often. And the biggest compliment you can receive is when other people notice the change in you and the fact that you're healthier. So again, stay consistent. Don't worry about what you see in the mirror. Don't look at the numbers on the scale.
And I'd also say, I think a lot of people maybe got discouraged during the pandemic because that disrupted a lot of PT plans. Did that change at all your approach, or have you had to adjust how you go about it?
Well, I would say not really, because again, my core in physical fitness is running, and the roads have always been clear. So
that's true. The sidewalks are free.
That's right.
Okay, well, good luck, sir, on your next race. And that's another question. Do you have any races coming up?
You know what? Well, it really depends if things start opening up because of the coronavirus, right? So obviously now things are pretty close. Hopefully, if things begin opening up and races become available, I'll definitely be signing up.
And have you done any virtual races?
I don't find those very fun. I love the competitive nature of seeing my opponents to my left and right, or to my front and rear. So
wait a minute, sir. You said you only compete with yourself.
I do. But then if I need that little bit of motivation, I just look to my left and right. You know what I mean?
I feel you, sir.
Like I'd rather be the predator, not the prey. So
yeah, one of our peers on the peninsula did the virtual Boston Marathon this year. So,
how'd that go?
I didn't hear about his time, but I know he definitely finished. Yeah.
Nice.
All right, well, definitely a lot of good points here, sir, and some inspiration maybe for some listeners out there. But I want to thank Major Fred Dequina for joining us here, and hope your next assignment goes just as well for you. And Captain Houston, thanks for being a special co-host. Maybe it'll become a regular thing. We'll see.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thanks for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode here on the Every Soldier Counts podcast.